So I mentioned at the start of the show, we have a guest joining us. We have him on phone. His name is Kelly Shackelford. I've certainly mentioned his name many times on this show. He is the president and CEO of First Liberty. This is a unique and extraordinary law firm in Texas, practices around the country, uniquely and only dedicated to taking up representation of individuals who are seeking religious freedom, who are making challenges about their religious freedom having been in some way damaged or limited. So we have surprising and interesting kinds of cases coming up during the coronavirus, related in part to the entire effort of the government to shut down the country, and how those actually apply to churches and religious organizations. So without further ado, I believe we have Kelly Shackelford online. Hi, Kelly.
Happy to be on, Debbie. Happy to be on.
So glad you could join me. So it's an amazing thing to think during this coronavirus, when there's so much attention being paid to elected officials and some non-elected officials who are really cracking down in an effort to prevent the spread of the coronavirus. And there have been, it seems, efforts in some cases to treat churches unfairly or religious organizations unfairly. And your organization, First Liberty, always available to represent those who are making challenges based on religious freedom. And I just think it's fastest, because I know you have a short amount of time today. Why don't you tell us the big cases that First Liberty took on during this coronavirus to challenge orders related to shutting down institutions and how those impacted churches?
Yeah, the good news is they're just violations across the country, but we're winning these. We've had to file things really all over the place, but we've got a 100% win rate so far. Let me start with what I think is the seminal case, because there really had never been a major constitutional case during a pandemic. And so everybody was kind of wondering, what's happening to our Constitution, because they saw pictures of fathers being handcuffed in front of their children for throwing a baseball with them in a park, and people arrested for coming off a paddleboard on the ocean, and these churches being told that they couldn't even, for instance, drive in their cars to the church, staying in their cars for a service outside. And so we knew that since there was no case law, we had to be really careful about the first case filed. And so we found what we thought was the right case. And right before Easter, we filed in Louisville, Kentucky, on behalf of a church, again, trying to have an Easter service and trying to make it communal without having any risk of getting the coronavirus. So they did a drive-in service. And many churches have done this, where they all stay in their car. They either broadcast through a radio frequency or a bullhorn or just a loud pastor that everybody can hear. And, of course, there's zero chance anybody's going to catch the coronavirus from one automobile to another. And believe it or not, in Louisville, Kentucky, this was not only a crime, but the governor and the mayor said they were going to write the license plates of everybody at the churches on Easter across the state, and that then they were going to be forced into a quarantine with all kinds of other criminal penalties. So we filed a lawsuit on Good Friday. The good news is we won a federal injunction. Judge Justin Walker, if you haven't read it, I'd encourage your listeners to read this opinion, because it's very powerful, and it reminded the whole country that, look, the Constitution is still in place, and this type of irrational and discriminatory attack on churches or religious freedom or First Amendment rights is not going to be allowed. And so that was sort of the beginning of all these lawsuits. I'll just say the sort of the bookend at this point so far is just on Friday we won the other one, which is we had another case, different part of Kentucky. We've had Kentucky, Washington, Illinois, all over the country. But this one was about whether churches could meet back in person. And in Kentucky, the order said that if you were in a Home Depot in a crowd, you're fine, or in a liquor store or anywhere else. But that if you tried to hold a safe, church in-service, in-person service with social distancing, with people pews apart, with all kinds of safety, that's a crime, up to 12 months in jail, which is just ridiculous that you would discriminate that way only against the religious entities. And we won not only an injunction on behalf of our client, Tabernacle Baptist Church, but the judge issued a statewide injunction against the governor, protecting every church across the state to meet safely and start their in-person services in Kentucky if the church felt that they could do so safely. So that was another, I think, really landmark victory. But we're just having to fight for freedoms to make sure that when we get through this pandemic, that the new normal is not one where we have less liberty. And Debbie, if people want info, they can go to our website at firstliberty.org. We've got all the layout on resources on what the law is on all of this, but also even a list of the victories so they can see the cases and maybe be encouraged that we're not all having our freedoms stripped away, that if we go into court, we can win. The Constitution is still in play. But we're going to have to be vigilant right now because there's a lot of petty dictators that want to abuse their power, unfortunately.
Kelly, that was a great summary, and I will tell for our listeners on my website, americacanwetalk.org, we have a link to firstliberty.org, which is their website. I do encourage you to go to it. It's full of information, firstliberty.org. You can read the kind of cases they've worked on. You can go read about past cases. First Liberty has been just a leader in standing up for religious freedom in America, and it's astonishing that cases uniquely arose in America related to the coronavirus and just a crackdown out of fear or some other reason. So I'm so grateful you were there. I want to, one last thing. So also on our website,
Sure.
There's a great video of you talking about what's been happening. I think it's maybe a week old or so. We've linked to it in our website too. But I urge you to watch that video. It's a great explanation of how First Liberty has been on top of the game during this challenge with coronavirus, defending religious liberty. The last quick question was, you were part of sending a letter, I believe, to members of Congress arguing about the idea that the protection they are considering putting in place for liability of organizations, of businesses, ought to extend to churches also. Can you quickly describe that?
Yeah, we want our businesses and our churches to open. I mean, we need that in our country. And so what you don't want is, I mean, if let's say they're talking about businesses, but let's apply this to the churches. Let's say you're a church and you want to open, and there are 17 pages of suggestions on how to do so safely from maybe the state. Maybe there's another one in another state that has an extra 10 pages. Maybe the CDC has some others. I mean, there's no way you can follow everything that's out there, and there are people, unfortunately, looking to take advantage of that by going into a church, and there's thousands of people there, or maybe 500 people there, or 200, or whatever, and leaving and then claiming, I was subjected to the coronavirus there, and therefore I'm filing a major lawsuit because the churches have money. The churches shouldn't be subjected to those kinds of frivolous suits. There should be a liability shield, because otherwise all businesses and churches would be scared to even open up because they would be subjecting themselves to really incredible harassment. And churches, businesses that are doing things safely, that are trying to follow all the rules, should be protected because we need our society back open. So we sent a letter on behalf of all the major leaders around the country, denominations, rabbis, pastors, Franklin Graham, Dr. Dobson, you name it, to Congress, laying this out. And hopefully, if they do end up passing something, which they've been talking about, they'll include churches and 501c3 nonprofit religious organizations in the protection as well.
So glad you spearheaded that and worked to let Congress know that churches have to be part of the protection they're providing to other organizations. Kelly Shackelford, again, for our listeners, firstliberty.org, great organization, great website. Thank you for taking time and joining me today.
Thank you, Debbie.